Yeah, so we didn't share this on Monday. We're sharing it now. Chad had prepared it, and when he's taught the crash course, he says it's been very helpful for the groups. So let me share my screen. It's pinned to the Slack channel now, so let's go over there and take a look. And what it is basically a folder with some documentation on tips, resources to use to help study, and essentially like a glossary of terms. Everything's organized in a way that it should be inclusive. Chad says that he collected this list along with class himself, so it's not AI generated. It was hand selected. And in addition to this resource, there's also this document that everybody should feel invited to add to. And what this is basically a list of tricky questions, right? So we've got one for CCP this week and then one for AIP next week. We've got a few examples here already, like what types of load balancers does AWS offer? Apparently, one of the choices that throws people off most is Elastic. And Elastic is not an actual option for load balancers. So that's what we want to do with this tab here. We want to be able to collect questions that are particularly tricky. And if we compile a list of these questions, then, well, that's with everybody contributing, it should build up pretty quick. So that's that. And what we have for today, we're basically going to be covering security, um, governance, and compliance. So not necessarily the most exciting topics. Um, I mean, that's subjective though, right? But still critical topics. I don't think this makes up like the largest portion either. I think there was a breakdown somewhere of what percentage of each group of topics or categories the exam comprises of. And today's stuff is really just, I don't know, I'm going to cover like 20% of the actual exam, but still important and fairly easy to blaze through anyway, right? So we're talking about, again, security, identity, and compliance. Let's see. Let's hear from folks in their own words, uh, what these things mean to you, like maybe from the perspective of an organization that you've worked for. So let's hear from Troy.
Okay. Um, so I work in a secure location, so this means a lot. And and in terms of um, the methods in which we ensure security, identity, and compliance, um, varies from how AWS does it, but a lot of the same controls are replicated or or in play.
Mhm.
So it's tied to the individual, tied to the organization in which the individual is associated with,
Mhm.
and then the roles in which that person is playing within that organization. Those are the security controls implemented in my workspace.
Okay. Yeah, and that sounds like it'd be pretty universal and common. One nice thing that AWS does, though, is they assign all of this to a model. And models are handy because they help us memorize and learn, right? Anything that has some kind of architecture or infrastructure, a backbone to attach to, is a little more easy to remember, right? And what AWS calls their model is the shared responsibility model. Basically, you in going to AWS and utilizing their services as a client are agreeing to a shared responsibility model that AWS will be responsible for certain things, and then the customer will be responsible for other things. And an analogy to use that can make this very simple to think about is AWS is like your landlord, and you are the tenant. And when you're reading through questions on the exam that are relating to the shared responsibility model, that analogy should help make it easier to think through what the answer might be. So anything that's like off the bat, let's say anything that's physical to the infrastructure, right? Like your on-premises servers, the infrastructure of the servers themselves, that the hardware, right? That is not the customer's concern. One other way that I've heard this phrased is in the shared responsibility model, AWS's concerns is of the cloud, and the customer's concerns are in the cloud. So again, we're following this landlord-tenant analogy. Basically, the cloud is like the building that the landlord owns. They will maintain the premises, the lawn, they'll maybe have a doorman, elevators, et cetera, et cetera. But your room inside of this building, well, your landlord's not going to, well, your landlord might furnish it, so maybe not the best example, but more often than not, you'll be furnishing it yourself. You'll be designing essentially what is it, the feng shui of how you want your home laid out. It would be kind of invasive for AWS to be doing things like configuring and blocking your own ports, right? The same way it'd be a little invasive for a landlord to be deciding, I don't know, how you should furnish your home, right? So that's the shared responsibility model in a nutshell. Let's talk through some possible questions. So, who is responsible for configuring security groups in an AWS environment? Would that be AWS, the data center operator, the customer, or CloudFront?
The customer.
Customer, exactly. And somebody explain why.
And it's up to you who can access what data, right? Or like who can access what resources. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Your landlord really, well, maybe in like some extreme cases, will not want you, inviting like unsavory characters to your home, but as long as you're on the lease, that's your prerogative, right? So you control security.
I do wonder though, and I guess I need to read into the documentation though, if we are extending out this metaphor,
Mhm.
so AWS itself, um, I mean, as far as they partition data, like for the folks that work there, and like their admins, is there at any point where they have the right to access any of the data or like, impose themselves within a security group? I assume the answer is no, because they do have government contracts. So I know, like the permissioning is fierce there, but I'm just super curious since like they own the physical servers, they own all of that stuff.
Right.
I'm just curious where it would be listed. Like, do they have the right at any point to delve into what's hosted? Or like, yeah.
That's a very good question. And I don't actually have the exact answer, but I think leaning into what your intuition is telling you, generally, the answer is going to be no. Whatever cases there might be for a use case like that.
Or like even legal, like
Mhm.
thinking of like what they're have like if there's a subpoena that they have to share something, or that this client's EC2 has this data or whatever, can they subpoena a data, any of that? I'm just
They
off the
probably,
wall
right.
question. So
They probably could be, but also if that did occur, depending on like the size of the organization, you'd probably have enough lawyers to protect your best interests, right?
Sure.
Um, but I would imagine that the architecture by design from the ground up is done so in such a way that there's enough like separation of concern. Anything that exists like within the EC2 that's essentially private to the client will predominantly remain client, or sorry, private to the client. And for those really extreme edge cases that really blur the lines, I think that's where specializations and specialist teams like an abuse team will come into play.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Okay, so which of the following is AWS responsible for under the shared responsibility model? Encrypting your application data, patching EC2 operating systems,
DNC.
VNC. All right. Anyone disagree? Did you say B and C or just C, by the way?
I said B and C because, but I
Okay.
guess I was halfway wrong, I guess, 50% wrong. But patching the EC2 operating systems, yeah, right. That would be part of the shared responsibility model.
Right. Yeah, these answers like this and questions like this are particularly tricky. And in this case, it's the operating systems, I think, that will really clue us in as to why this is not the responsibility of AWS.
I don't know why either because I know it's part of the shared responsibility model. I think the customers should be responsible for the not the operating system configuration
Mhm.
and not necessarily patching that. I don't think that's right, actually.
Well, let's look this up.
AWS isn't going to be able to patch the OS because it could potentially break applications.
Yeah.
So I I wouldn't think that AWS would do it. I mean, they don't just based on my experience. But if you think about like how often patches break stuff, AWS wouldn't go ahead and start patching in a customer's environment.
Very good point,
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
Anything that a customer essentially has control over will likely be something that they're responsible for, right? And that's why I think the key word here is the operating systems. When you register in EC2, that's what you as a customer have control over, right? You select the image that you want this EC2 to run. You select basically what version, operating system, what distribution, and you can even use custom images. You don't have to use just the images that are provided by AWS. So customers have enough control here that it falls under their jurisdiction.
I wanted to, like when you're picking your OS, there's
Mhm.
a snapshot of that OS. And so the assumption would be patches up to that snapshot would have been applied. And as you are pulling that initial EC2 image, you are getting an image that would be fully up to date of whatever the snapshot is, right? So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. So yes, so that's why questions like this are really tricky, right? So if AWS is providing this image, then is it the operating system that they're patching, or is it the image that they're patching, right? So be very careful for these very ambiguous questions and just try not to overthink it because overthinking can potentially lead you to answering incorrectly. Okay, a company fails to enable encryption for customer data stored in S3. Who was responsible?
The customer. Again, according to the model, client-side encryption is responsibility of the customer.
Hmm. Yep, this one's pretty straightforward. All right, which of the following is a shared responsibility between AWS and the customer?
Ooh, oh, I don't know this one. Well, physical security, no. That's definitely AWS.
Hmm.
Uh, securing the hypervisor, network configuration at the OS level. Mm, hmm, not sure about securing the hypervisor because I believe that's still on the customer. It's securing the platform itself, an application, that would be the customer. I am role assignments clear to the customer. I
Hmm.
don't so that's between securing the hypervisor. I think it's D.
Okay, let's hear some other thoughts. Cam, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's C or D, but then I would choose C because D says the OS level. I
Hmm.
just think that's the customer.
Okay. Any other opinions? Okay, so Cam, your final answer was C, you said, or D?
D. C, Charlie.
Okay. Anyone else? Monica?
Um, I'm thinking D.
Okay. All right. So far, two for D and one for C. Let's see. All right. And the answer is D. Network configuration at the operating system level. Network security is shared. AWS secures infrastructure level networking. Customers handle operating system level configs like firewalls and ports. So I hate this question. I think it's very poorly worded because this, especially right here, is what makes it really tricky. Intuitively, I would agree with those of you that were saying because it's at the OS level that makes this answer questionable. Um, Chad put together these questions, so I can't remember where he grabbed them from, but for questions like this, let's think through as a group, like why this was even included at the OS level. Like not having that little
Confuse you?
yeah, actually, probably, right? I mean,
Well,
So it's just like Route 53 would fall under infrastructure level, and then your internet gate falls under your control.
hmm hmm yeah.
Well,
but
I
it's a
almost
configuration piece, though. I mean, it's intuitively you have to think AWS can necessarily configure your network because I mean that's information they don't have, right? They're not gonna have access. They're not gonna know who your IP address. They're not gonna know your MAC address for all your network connected devices. They're not gonna know all that information unless you provide that information to
hmm
you. So you already know intuitively the network configuration just seems like it's going to be on a customer level. But I think you're right, Julius. The distinction is at the OS level, which makes you think, yeah, I mean,
Right.
makes it a little confusing. But the thing is, that's why I just use the process of elimination, right? Make it a 50-50 choice. Because, but then when you really think about it, securing the hyper, like I wasn't even really completely sure that configuration was right.
hmm
Like, I just thought to myself, securing a hypervisor was not right, if that makes sense.
So this is shared. AWS secures infrastructure level networking. Just what is that? What components are they doing when they do that?
The network configuration. Well, it could be the actual physical components of the network. Um,
well, when you spin up a EC2, like they'll automatically assign the private IP address space if you don't specifically assign IPs within the VPC.
hmm
So there is some automation at the network layer for the configs in the OS if you don't go in there and um, specify your own subnets and IP space. But then
mm,
AWS does monitor the network traffic, whether it's the IP traffic or the DNS traffic, because they do look for people abusing the infrastructure for like brute forcing crypto miners, different type of uses of their infrastructure that they see at the network layer.
hmm
try to keep the
But
crypto, bro. I beg.
but I almost think D should have been more like network configuration at like the network layer would be my leaning versus the OS. But
yeah, even that though, like that wording is just so ambiguous because it's not really explicitly stating what network or what OS we're referring to, right? And I think that's what makes this really tricky. When we think about like the physical servers themselves, they too will have to have an operating system in order to run and operate, right? And That's essentially what this is cluing us into. I think the strategies that you guys are bringing up are all very useful, especially Opina, what you said about using the process of elimination. Definitely just thinking about these kind of questions methodically and then going from there is probably your best bet against tricky questions like this. And definitely, I think to Kathleen's point, it's very intentional for them to try and throw as many curveballs at you because the more you fail, the more you have to retake the tests, right? Okay, so question 5, true or false, AWS is responsible for patching the operating system on your EC2 instance. This probably should have been posted way above because it's a very simple one, and we could infer from the previous questions what the answer is. But for the sake of the exercise, somebody call it out. What is this? Is this true or false?
False.
False.
Right on. Okay. So
If you're looking
now,
for somebody to make it completely complicated, I could do that for you. Because I mean, if you think about it on a quantum level, it could be true and false at the same time, according to Schrodinger's box. And you're
okay,
not gonna know until you actually open the box.
not
You
until
don't know if it's patched until you open the instance.
Exactly. Just leave it a surprise, you know? We'll see what happens. We'll just go on a vacation for the weekend and hopefully the server's not on fire when we get back.
I will say that's something. Okay, so say I have an instance. This is something new though. Is that something that we're gonna learn, like patching the OS on an EC2 instance? Or is that for a different course?
we not for this course, we don't have any specific use cases for that. We don't really have a lot of yeah, one of the reasons we added the crash course and like these 2 weeks of going over the certification like this is because we don't really have good ways to demo or write labs around things like patching an operating system or using security services like um, inspector or guard duty because we don't have anything to really inspect, right? Maybe one day we can increase our budget for AWS spend and build in our infrastructure that perpetually persists so we could use all these other tools. But at the moment, that's not the case. Um, yeah, so for things like learning how to patch an OS, the best we could do was talk about it and maybe look for resources to point you in that direction if you were interested in trying it out.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Right on. So, okay, now we understand the division of responsibilities and why this distinction matters. Somewhat related to the shared responsibility model is another aspect of separation of concerns, and that's going to be permissions, right? And we handle this through IAM, which all of you are already somewhat familiar with. We've had to create IAM users for all of you. You've all got access keys and key pairs. You all know in a nutshell that through IAMs, you can create user groups, which are just groups of users. Users can have separate roles, and roles can have different policies and permissions attached to them. So just like this image says, just like we talked about, we've got users for individual people, groups for collections of people, and roles for a little more nuance and fine control. So not everyone in a group may necessarily have to have the same permissions. Okay, so some things to know about the policies. They are written in JSON. You always have the option of writing them out yourself and then attaching them. I think you've seen that in the UI, and you could also see that through the command line. Um, we have additional layers to security like multi-factor authentication, and we have the identity center that allows us to manage a range of identities all at once. Okay, so practice questions. You want to allow an EC2 instance to access an S3 bucket. Which IAM identity type should you use?
Roll.
All right. Anyone else? Right on. We can attach a role to something that's not really a user. And that way we could give the instance the ability to interact with other services in AWS. Okay. Which of the following allows a developer to log in to the AWS Management Console?
User.
Yep, it is the user. Okay. You want to apply the same permission set to all junior developers. What is the best IAM strategy?
See?
Yep. That's exactly what the groups are for. They allow us to avoid having to attach these same permissions to a range of users over and over and over again. All right, which AWS security feature requires code from a mobile device in addition to a password?
B.
Multi-factor.
Yep. One of the most annoying things, in my opinion, multi-factor authentication, but apparently it's secure, so we live with it. All right, a user is assigned a policy that shows S3. Sorry, am I recording? Just want to make sure I'm recording. Okay. I am recording, right? Yes, I am. Okay. Where was I? A user is assigned a policy that allows S3 and a wildcard, but it is also part of a group that explicitly denies delete object. What happens in this case?
D. Because I know when you assign these policies, all right, there's a number to determine which one takes precedence, right? It's
Sorry,
like
say
the
that
first
again.
column.
What was that, Okino?
Oh, I'm saying I know when you create these policies, right? There's like because we done this before, right? I think with the inbound and outbound traffic, there's like the first column allows you to determine like the policy level, which
Mhm.
one takes precedence. I think it's like the first column, so I think the answer is D.
Okay.
Oh, cool. Wait, what? Oh, I was right, but I was wrong.
So a user is assigned a policy that allows S3, but it's also part of a group that explicitly denies the delete object. And essentially, it says the user can't delete objects because the explicit deny will override the allow, which makes sense if you think about it. It's like better to be safe than sorry. Deny taking precedence only for roles. Um, what was your reasoning for thinking that again, Okino?
Oh, it was the same reason. I mean, the same because what the answer says. I know certain things take certain precedence, right?
But why
But
only for roles?
I think the rules kind of threw me off. I thought it had to be explicit. Like I
Mm,
thought when you create these policies, you have to explicitly either deny, um, you attach a precedence, right? Whether you I'm sorry, which one takes precedence, right? Whether
mm.
the ability to not to delete an object or allow the person full access. And I thought you can do that based on either the user role, the group, or based on policy. That was my line of thinking. I'm thinking you had that level of control where you can create different levels of precedence based on either the role, the user, or the group. So I think I'm wrong,
Mhm.
like blatantly wrong. So I think that's something I have to follow up on.
Okay. Yeah. The when you're setting the policies, you could set denial like explicitly, and that essentially trumps allows. If you think about like explicit versus implicit denial, I think That's I don't even know how to like articulate what I'm trying to say here.
Mm.
Not giving somebody permission to do something is sort of tantamount to like an implicit denial, right?
Oh, okay, okay. Yeah, yeah, I see what you're saying. It's you said it before, it's better safe than sorry, right?
Hmm.
If you didn't, if it wasn't explicitly given to that person, they implicitly don't have access.
Hmm. But then if we give them the S3 and the access, we still might want to fine tune that control and maybe like for example, we want them to be able to add objects, but for whatever reason, maybe we want to be able to track historically what's been put inside of this S3 bucket. We don't want them to delete objects. Okay. Optional hands-on exercise. You guys can try these exercises in the console after all of this. But let's try to get through the rest of these questions, and I'll also show you what the format for the quizzes are today. All right, where are we at? We are now on security services. Okay, so this is the stuff that I briefly mentioned earlier as being things that we can't really or have not been able to create lessons and labs and assignments around. But this security suite is more or less one of the nice things about AWS is you could generally infer from the name of the service what its responsibilities are, right? So we can think about Shield as being a tool that protects against invasion and unwanted connections. You can filter malicious traffic through a firewall, just like you would setting up a firewall on your local machine or local network. Guard duty is threat detection. So it's more about observation and collecting data. And we have Macy, which I think is one of the trickier ones to kind of understand. I kind of think about it as MA relating to machine learning. It's not the best, but one of the selling points for Macy is that it is machine learning powered, right? We use machine learning in Macy to find sensitive information and flag things accordingly. So let's see, which AWS services helps detect unusual API activity and potentially compromised credentials?
API, making an API request, credentials. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. A?
Anyone else?
This is kind of tricky because like the logs that you need to do the detection in guard duty might come from your WAF.
Mhm.
Uh,
DNS. Yeah.
A or D.
But
Yeah, D.
Yeah, definitely a good point, Patrick, that it is tricky, but again, we want to try to avoid like overthinking, right? And so at the simplest way to interpret the question is just looking at like this keyword, detect, and it's essentially the guard duty service itself that handles that detection. Where that logging gets stored happens after the fact. And so we can use that to infer that D is the answer. Okay. You need to protect a web app against SQL injection. Which service should you use?
D.
B, because Shield again protects against DDoS attacks, so it just tries to detect an unusual amount of traffic or if
I,
a
I always
request
think
is
of a web
being
application firewall is redundant if the developers know how to write secure code. So SQL injection is a coding vulnerability, and that's what a
Yeah, yeah.
WAF
Oh
does.
wait, maybe an inspector then, because that's what the inspector does, right? It detects vulnerable code.
I think it's vulnerabilities in the images in the OS or inspector.
Um, hmm. Yeah, so it'd be the BSC. So I think mm, yeah, I think I still like my answer B, but inspector has a point.
Well,
Yeah.
good thing you went with your gut because you were right. It is B. And let's see, let's take a look at, I think I have inspector up here somewhere. So automated and continual vulnerability management at scale. So your reasoning for thinking that it could have been inspector was, what was it again?
Because the inspector basically checks for vulnerabilities within I'm not sure whether it's vulnerability within the code or because it audits
Mhm.
and checks the code for certain types of vulnerability and it seems to me no, it's just the configuration of the code itself. Because I think I agree with Patrick. Patrick seems like SQL injection seems more like a coding problem to an extent. Um, but mm, yeah, yeah, that's I'm just saying SQL expect doesn't make any sense to me because all it does is it checks for it's a vulnerability detection, right? So it just checks the configurations of maybe your instance or
I think maybe the identity center, like if only certain users are allowed to write to databases, maybe.
well, SQL injection essentially, I think my conceptual understanding is that when you allow for an SQL statement to basically run a script or execute code, right?
Right. And
Yeah,
generally,
but you can limit which like of the functions it can do, right? Like you could limit so a user could query for select so it returns information but not to like delete. Um it's just a thought. But anyway,
No, you're right. I
Yeah,
mean, like essentially it's role-based
SQL.
access control.
yeah.
So that particular piece
Yeah,
of code, a component of code it can perform certain actions, but you limit other actions that it can do.
typically you go up the stack for SQL injection prevention with input validation. So whether you're
Mm.
doing it in the front end in your form or you do it on the back end, you're just filtering that the SQL statement coming through is actually restricted to just the type of SQL statement. Like they can't run like 1 + 1 = 2 or whatever. Like you're basically passing like a true result to the database. So like that's a SQL injection.
Mm.
And input validation is usually the control to stop that, where a web application firewall is sitting in the middle and is kind of doing this input validation uh, for us if it's not in the code.
okay, so it sounds like your answer, Patrick, is it's WAF because that's what it's designed for. In theory, you can write additional layers of validation and security into your front end, but also in theory, you shouldn't need to because generally attacks that utilize SQL injections are done so by basically capitalizing on vulnerabilities, right? So it's kind of like you don't know what you don't know. You can't write validation for something that you weren't even aware was vulnerable. That was never the intention in the first place. And so having a firewall which is designed to check and block communications without the need for a developer to guide how that works through additional code. It's it's the optimal solution, at least out of these choices. And that was the correct line of thought. It definitely is B. So that allows us to block HTTP requests, including SQL injection. Which service helps identify personally identifiable information stored in S3? So sensitive information like social security numbers.
Oh, that one's easy. Oh,
D. Macy.
Right on, Macy. Yep, and it does so using machine learning. Okay, a company wants to scan their container images and EC2 instances for vulnerabilities. What service should they use in this case?
words, scan, inspector.
Inspector. Yep. And finally, which AWS service provides DDoS protection and is enabled by default? Apparently, this is a trick question.
Is it? Because it's just Shield standard though. Because I know there's the Shield and then there's also Shield Advanced, but Shield standard, um, it automatically has DDoS attacks enabled as default.
Yep. I wonder why that was listed as a trick question.
Um, if you answer it wrong, somebody's gonna come out of the laptop and punch you in the face. That's the trick. Or the treat. I don't know, trick or treat.
We're a little past that, but all right, last one. Governance, tools, CloudTrail, config, and AWS organizations. So basically, what are governance tools? They allow us to track API level activity, like who did what. And this is handy for compliance purposes, security, auditing. We want to know after the fact if who the bad actors were in a situation that is of enough concern that we're investigating after the fact. Uh, these don't automatically block actions like WAF or IAM might. Instead, they're really designed for monitoring and documenting. CloudTrail, I know a lot of questions will generally try to ask you if this kind of action is done by things like CloudTrail or CloudFormation or any of the other cloud services with cloud in the name. I think of CloudTrail as being associated with this kind of activity because of the word trail. I don't know, that just makes me think of like a trail of breadcrumbs, right? So if we think about CloudTrail as essentially this mechanism for tracking user activity, that's that should help you get through a lot of questions. There's at least from the questions that we've collected, there's a lot that try to throw the same pattern at you. Let's see. So basically, key features of CloudTrail are it's automatically enabled on all AWS accounts. It tracks who did what, when, and where, and it records actions like who runs instances, who's deleting buckets, etc. AWS config tracks resource configuration, which is pretty straightforward. Um, Maybe less straightforward part is how that configuration is tracked over time. And this allows us to detect if our infrastructure drifts from known good state to potentially worse states because of bad configurations. And we could use history to help verify that kind of data. Basically, yes, version control for AWS infrastructure. AWS organizations. This allows you to manage multiple AWS accounts. I think tomorrow we're going to be going over, what was it? What was it? Consolidated billing. That's, I think, also covered by quite a lot of questions. And That's somewhat related to organizations, but yes, you will be going over that in more detail tomorrow. Uh, where were we? Yeah, so basically, it groups accounts into organizational units, and we're able to apply service control policies across those various accounts. And there's also the option of consolidated billing across child accounts, and there are quite a number of questions that will test your knowledge on what the benefits of consolidated billing are. Okay, so great for separating different needs based on different environment, different phases of the life cycle while maintaining control overall. All right. Which service records all AWS API activity across an account?
CloudTrail.
Yep, CloudTrail. You want to monitor whether your resources match approved configurations. Which service should you use?
Is that one, Inspector?
No, it's config. It's in the name.
Mhm. Yep, this one's going to be
Okay.
config. Again, Inspector was more about scanning for vulnerabilities. Let's see. Which AWS service allows you to apply policies across multiple accounts? Whoops. I'm going to click on that. But I mean, I already clicked on it, so we know it's B. All right, here's another trick question. Can AWS organizations grant a user permission to create EC2 instances?
Mm. Okay. An organization itself. I thought only the admin can do that though, right? Can grant permission to create an EC2 or mm, uh, multi-factor authentication doesn't make any sense now because it's just confirming the identity.
Mhm.
And with an IAM role, okay. So that either leaves D or blatantly yes or no.
Okay, so A, B, or D. Anyone else? Let's see.
It's an
Edison.
organization. That's the key term here. An organization essentially is like a management council, right?
I think of it as
I
like
was,
a level in
I
higher
was, I'm,
groups. Sorry, was that Edison?
yeah, I was thinking about yes, in the sense that when you create a free tier account with AWS, they could allow you create an EC2 instance, but
Mhm.
I don't know. I'm just leaning into yes.
Can I double down on that with the logic of question three says AWS service allows you to apply policies, which was AWS organizations. And so because you can apply policies, then wouldn't that be able to grant someone something? So that's my logic, and it probably needs to be proven wrong.
Let's find out. I really like what you brought up there, Troy. And I think like that's the kind of like rational thinking a rational human being would apply. But because AWS is trying to throw all these curveballs at you, I think the tricky thing here is how they were ambiguous about the word policies. And if because we're talking about organizations and how the policies that they can set are these service control policies, then they can't directly grant permission to use EC2 instances. Fortunately, there shouldn't be so many really tricky questions like this that it's going to severely impact your score. I think you have to get above 70% if I remember correctly. So as long as you guys are thinking the way that you're thinking right now, you'll do just fine. All right. Which service helps detect configuration drift?
D is in Charlie.
Right on. Anyone else? Cool. All right. C as in Charlie, AWS config, keyword being configuration. Okay. So that's interesting. This still shows this. Looks like the assignments inside of these lessons, I didn't even realize they had assignments in them, are wrong. I don't think you guys are going to have access to that. So we have these inside of the challenges in the README at the day level. We have some Google Forms. These are each about 60 questions long. They'll let you know if you're able to submit multiple selections. Otherwise, it would just be one. And I think you have to put in your email in order to get a response. Otherwise, it does get stored in our Platoon Google account. But if you don't put your email, I'm not going to know who the who took the test. So I won't really be able to give those results to you anyway. So add your email and you should get a copy of the answers and how much you got correct sent to you by email. There are 3 of them. They're all about 60 questions long. Try to get through at least one today and use the rest throughout the week. We are about at time, so I'm going to open up breakout rooms. We can take a break. And Mike, Kim, and I will be here in the main room to answer questions. Cool. And then let's meet back up around 9.